Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 295, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. I hope your week is off to an amazing start, and all your cats and dogs and any other pets are safe. Don't know if you've heard, people are eating them. Welcome back to Holy City Center Radio. For those who are like, what the hell is he talking about? Congratulations for not watching the presidential debate last week and not seeing any news coverage of it. It must be amazing. So we're not going to talk about it further. I just had to, it's just one of the most ridiculous things that's ever come up in a debate. And it's just been on my mind ever since it happened. It's so wacky. And been debunked for those who don't know the whole story. So in any event, let's move on from that. We do have a theme to today's episode, which is schools. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. Education in South Carolina. Lots of updates to tell you about. But before we do that, yes, I had to make the silly little joke at the top, if you even want to call it that. But also, I finally did something worth talking about on the podcast. It had been a little while since I've, gone out and really done too much. I haven't checked out any new restaurants in a while. I hadn't done any events, but the streak is over. This past Sunday, I went to the music hall for a concert. No, nothing huge here. I go to concerts somewhat frequently, as people know, and it wasn't any, no groundbreaking event or restaurant opening or anything. But I did something fun. It was nice to be out and enjoy a show. I saw a band called Alkaline Trio. They are like a pop punk. Trio, obviously, originally from Chicago. They saw their biggest success in the late 90s to maybe mid 2000s. I think they had a couple records that did actually pretty well in like the 2007, 2008 range. And it was a great show, a lot of fun. One of the members of the band is actually, he's been a founding member, and it also replaced Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 when he left the band the second time he left the band. He filled in and was an official member and went touring. I think it was like for 6 or 7 years. He was on 2 albums, so you may know him from that if you just knew about Blink-182 but didn't really follow any of the other lesser known bands of that era, that didn't make it, huge as far as like radio play and MTV videos and all that. So in any event, just a little side note for you there, but I enjoyed the show. It was nice to, like I said, to get out. I'm not a huge fan of Sunday night shows, whether they're comedy, which if I remember correctly, David Spade, when I saw him earlier this year, was a Sunday. I think when I saw Steve Martin and Martin Short, that was a Sunday, if I remember correctly. Not the best, kind of a late night on Sunday. You just want to watch football all day and just kind of relax at the end of the night. But I was able to, get some energy up. And I was like, I'm doing this, and bought a last minute ticket. I've wanted to see them perform live before. So it was a lot of fun. But in any event, oh, and I almost forgot, I did one other cool thing recently. You may remember, it's been a little while, actually, a lot further in the past than I thought. I mean, it's only a couple months, but I could have swore I did this interview like 2 weeks ago. But on the 275th episode of Holy City Center Radio, I interviewed psychic and trance medium Haley Lowe Fennell. She actually replayed that interview recently on her podcast feed. She asked if she could have the episode and just run it. I said, of course. So you may have seen it there if you ended up following her or were previously. But in any event, she had offered to do a reading for me around the time that I had asked if she'd want to do an interview. And then I said, I would love that. Thanks so much. But would it be possible to include my mom? My mom is very much interested in that world of, mediumship, if that's the right word. She's gone to different events. She's had readings done before. She says, in that in the reading we did together with Haley, she had mentioned towards the end, and she feels like she sees signs a lot from relatives or friends that have passed. And so I knew she would be really, really interested in having a reading. Not that I wasn't. This was the first time I've ever had a reading done. I was very interested what it would be like to have a reading. It's obviously vastly different than seeing something on TV or even if you go to like a public one, if you're not involved, you don't know. You're like, well, this seems really cool and interesting, but I would like to know what it's like to actually have a reading done and what that's like. So it was great. Haley is lovely, very kind and nice, and she was, it was awesome that she was able to do that for us and had no problem with, doing a Zoom interview or reading with my mom and myself at the same time. And it was a really cool experience. It's not going to be on her podcast, and I'm not going to dive into any huge details, but it was interesting. Some of the stuff that she, without any prompting from us, saying who she felt was coming through and what they were telling her, and some stuff were dead on with what, whether it was character traits or if you listen to her podcast, she does a lot of like sometimes family members or friends or whatever on the other side will come through and like essentially sort of give advice, nothing, wild, like put all your money into the stock, but more like, hey, I'm getting this feeling that I'll just use the example of part of mine. I'm getting an example of maybe there's some, big changes with your work, or maybe you're considering something that involves writing. And that is something that is going on. And then she was like, yeah, well, the person she said was coming through, I believe at the time was one of my grandmothers, was saying, go forward, move forward. And again, I'm not going to get too much into it, but that was the gist of it. And then said a couple like recommendations based on that. And it was just interesting. I desperately want to believe that life doesn't end, when we're done here on Earth, and that there is another plane of existence or another something out there. Um, and stuff like this helps you think, hey, maybe there is a little bit more than we think. When life ends and things. So, very interesting experience. Would certainly be open to doing readings again. I find the whole thing really interesting, and yeah. So that was another fun experience that I had, and if you're interested, you can go back and listen to that interview, or go to her website. You can book a reading and things like that. She's awesome. She's very nice, and accommodating, and just wants to help folks out. So that was the other fun thing I did. So yeah, look at that. I got two things to talk about. And without any further delay, though, the real reason you're here is for some news. And as I said, we've got a bit of a theme today. It doesn't always happen, but every once in a blue moon. Hopefully my voice going up there didn't just damage all your ears. But yeah, this is all going to be about South Carolina education. As you can imagine, not all of it's great, but maybe you'll find something in here that's not so bad. But without any further delay, let's get into it. Do you all remember, we've talked about school board and Superintendent Ellen Weaver a lot, the Charleston County School Board, I should say specifically a lot, and the state superintendent, Ellen Weaver. For those who don't remember, she was a candidate who was kind of running on like the Moms for Liberty, kind of like talking points, and, talking about we don't want to indoctrinate our kids, that whole thing. And then it came to light that she didn't have a master's degree, which was by law is required in South Carolina for the superintendent to have it. And so she had this, like, I don't even know what to call, like, express version of a master's course, or not even a course, like the entirety of a master's program. She was able to get it done in less than a year, if I remember. I forget how many months it was, some kind of expedited program through Bob Jones University, which you can look into the issues with that school, not, and certification issues and all sorts of other stuff. So we talked about all that. A lot of people felt she wasn't really qualified for the role. She didn't actually have the students' best interests in mind. It was more about culture war stuff. And she seems to continue to prove those folks right. And another instance of that. Now, again, keep in mind, she ran on this platform of don't want to indoctrinate the students, which goes back to these made up stories and assertions that schools are like teaching kids to be liberal or left leaning, or teaching kids that they're to blame, like white students are to blame for slavery. And they're turning kids gay or trans, all this ridiculousness. Um, that was going on. Now, I'm not saying she specifically mentioned those things, but her type of rhetoric was closely aligned with folks who did, go and mention those specific things that they claim were going on. And so obviously it's a dog whistle to those people who, like, oh, that sounds familiar. That's like a talking point I've heard. She's on our side kind of thing. You know how you can tell when people are kind of using talking points without necessarily going to the extreme is just kind of like a little, hey, you know what I'm saying, right? When I say that. So, uh, after all that talk about indoctrination, there are some folks who are concerned that that's exactly what is now happening. So, there were some people obviously not happy with her getting elected, but yeah, she removed some things. She said that honors, there was a an honors African American history course that was being kind of road tested. She didn't really want it to be approved, and there's been some other small things, but now there's like a direct, clear line of what exactly her goals are. So what am I talking about here? The South Carolina Department of Education is partnering with a conservative media platform called PragerU. The company made that announcement, not the Department of Education, shocker. But the company announced it on September 16th, saying that some of its videos and other instructional materials had been approved for classroom use as optional resources. So none of these, to be clear, are requirements. But the State Department of Education is still partnering with this group, and these things are available to students. So we were talking about, we don't want kids indoctrinated. We don't want them taught these things, and a lot of the stuff they were claiming students were being taught, they weren't. And they were saying, well, there's a book in the library. There was always something. So now we're seeing that exact same thing. Well, this isn't. Now they're doing the thing that they were worried about. Now you might be saying, "Oh, right. What makes this a conservative platform? What is or media company, and is it really that big of a deal?" Well, this company's been around for a little bit, and it's had several controversies because of its content. And I would think, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, this would be very concerning. So this controversial platform PragerU has things like short videos that can be played by students or teachers. They face criticism for inaccurately portraying American history and advancing conservative political arguments. In a video conversation with PragerU CEO Marissa Street that was posted on September 16th, State Superintendent of Education Ellen Weaver described some of PragerU's resources about the Constitution is, quote, a wonderful resource that really breaks down barriers and provides access to some of the most wonderful content I've seen on this topic, end quote. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. Maybe it's not so bad, right? Well, number one, an education department spokesperson did not respond to the Post and Courier's request for comments about the details of the partnership and how it came to be. The fact that the education department didn't announce it and wouldn't respond to media requests shows that they're like, we were kind of hoping this would sneak under the radar. That's my opinion. Nobody involved with it said that, but that's certainly what it seems like. So what are they embarrassed about? What are they worried about getting out there? Well, several standards about modern world history are part of PragerU's video series, and they've had some with very concerning titles and content. One is, quote, "If you live in freedom, thank the British Empire," end quote. That series or that video argues that the British Empire was a force for spreading freedom, which is bonkers because they, as well documented, took over lots of places, not in the name of freedom, but in terms of spreading their culture, their priorities, the monarchy, and their power. It had nothing to do with spreading freedom. So that already is bonkers. Other standards are paired with videos that explain things like, quote, why private investment works and government investment doesn't. And they even have a video titled, "Is Fascism Right or Left?" This this is coming from the party in this state, conservative Republicans, who are worried that kids are being indoctrinated with leftist policies. I did not see even one accusation about these quote unquote leftist policies, talking about, which side of the party is to blame for fascism. Is it one or the other? Can both? There was nothing like that. I didn't hear any stories about private investments versus government investments. It was all not a nonsense, like I said, that, oh, white kids are being taught that they're to blame for slavery, which isn't true. That's not what was happening at all. It was a lot of that kind of stuff. But I mean, this, just the titles alone, like, this isn't something that kids should be learning about. It's okay to learn about, what fascism is, of course. That's an important thing to learn about. But to talk about if it's specifically a right or left thing is bizarre to me. Uh, and it doesn't stop there. Some of you might be like, whatever, this is some optional, some kid who's into politics maybe is going to look at this, but it's probably not going to be a big talking point within the school. But that's not it. They have all sorts of concerning things. There was a cartoon of Frederick Douglass that had Frederick Douglass alluding to the founding fathers being abolitionists, which is also hilarious because they clearly were not. And it's insane to say otherwise. They have another one, a cartoon, that has Christopher Columbus telling children that, quote, being taken as a slave is better than being killed, end quote, and not to judge enslavers by, quote, modern standards, end quote. Again, just insane talking points, not true history, uh, clearly trying to push an agenda. I mean, it's insane. It's bonkers. They also have science-themed videos, some of which deny the climate crisis. Now, I don't mind kids learning about, hey, we have a climate crisis. Some think it's majority man-made and this can be done and this can be done. Others think that this is just normal, and there's nothing we can do about it, and it's going to, whatever. I don't mind them getting different viewpoints of things like that. But just denying that there's an issue with the climate when even people who deny some of the science agree. Yeah, oh yeah, no, there is an issue. We're heating up. It leads to extreme weather. They may believe that there's nothing that can be done, or that we can, that it's like a cyclical thing and we're going to be fine in another generation or something. But they're not denying that we're going through it. I mean, this is a denial of the crisis, period. And that's also insane. As if that wasn't enough, the platform also lifts up the opinions of people like Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, Betsy DeVos, members of the Heritage Foundation, and others. These are all not just right-wing, commentators or activists, which is, one thing, but these are pretty extreme in that category. And the fact that this isn't seen as indoctrination by the party that was claiming that kids were being indoctrinated, it just gives up the game. Hey, we're going to scare these parents into thinking that their kids are learning all this false information. We're going to scare the white families into thinking that the kids are being taught that they're to blame for slavery. We're going to make them think that this is causing racial division in schools. We're going to tell them their kids are going to turn gay or turn trans, and the school's forcing it on them. And then once we have efficiently whipped up this manufactured crisis and people are upset, we'll go ahead and try to implement what we really want our kids to be taught, which isn't necessarily true history. It's, our take on it, our opinions on it. It's thankfully PragerU made the announcement because it does not appear the education department in this state was going to do it. For a little bit more background, and actually, there's one more PragerU video that is linked to a state standard about analyzing biblical traditions. Again, no place for this in schools. Separation of church and state. You can have vague talks about, of course, religion and, how people's religion might have influenced specific cultural events. But this video is entitled, "If There Is No God, Murder Isn't Wrong," which was created by Prager himself, the actual person. Dennis Prager is his name, who created this company. He founded it. He's a conservative talk show host. No big surprise there, right? So that video drew criticism from many people, including the ACLU of South Carolina. Their spokesperson Paul Bauer said, "quote It shouldn't need repeating, but public schools do not exist for the purpose of religious indoctrination." End quote. Again, and I'm Christian, so if I had kids and they're learning about the Bible, okay, that's my religion. Obviously, that's cool with me, but I don't believe that should be happening in schools. Uh, that's the point. You're not supposed to go, hey, that's what I want, so do it. It's supposed to be, well, we're not supposed to be doing that. And even though I don't mind my kid learning that, there are probably plenty of parents who don't want their kids learning that because they're a different religion or they don't believe in any or whatever. It's just insane that this is going on. Uh, and even the companies, like, they don't hide who they are. They even describe themselves as providing people with, quote, intellectual ammunition they need to advocate for limited government, individual responsibility, and economic freedom, end quote. All very well known right wing kind of phrases or terms that are used all the time. Obviously, they're for limited government. Now, again, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being conservative or being liberal or wherever you land on that spectrum. But this is not what you're supposed to be doing in schools. That's the problem here. It wouldn't have been right if people were doing it with leftist policies. And it's not right if they're going to do it with these, right wing talking points. And it's just, you see this a lot where one side says, we need to stop X, whether it's true or not. They stop it or convince people they've stopped it, and then they go ahead and do whatever that thing was, just with their take on it. And no political party is 100% clear on that, of course. So let me be straightforward in saying that I'm sure there are plenty of examples where this has happened with more liberal or left-leaning politicians or groups or whatever. But this is South Carolina, of course, so this is what we're talking about here. So I encourage you to visit the link in the show notes. There's a couple, including one that is much more opinion-based by The Arena, which is a left-leaning news outlet that has popped up here in the area with folks like Dr. Annie Andrews, who write pieces, Jermaine Johnson, and some others. So, but there's also the Post and Courier article, which is more of the straight here reporting of here's what's happening, here's what one side says, here's what the other side says. So you can kind of see what other folks are saying, but just those titles of those videos and the topics and how the company describes itself should be huge red warning lights just flashing for you right now. Like, this is not right. Even if it's optional resources, we're being told optional resources, assuming they're age appropriate, of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but we're being told optional resources, aka things kids are not being, they don't have to, consume, whether it's, hey, go do a book project and they pick out a book. That's not something the teacher demanded they do. That's just something, they were able to go find in the library themselves. But we've been told there's all this horrific stuff in libraries that are indoctrinating children, all these optional resources. And so we'd be like, this isn't part of the curriculum. And, well, they can get it somewhere else. And so that's exactly what's happening here. It's not an official part of the curriculum, but it very easily could be. And or because it's an optional resource, the teacher could make it mandatory in their class. So very concerning stuff. I encourage you all to look into it more. Reach out to whoever is appropriate depending on where you live in this state. We need answers about how this came to be, what, if anything, it's costing the state, and of course, like, how exactly this is going to be used. But even if they're like, well, it's optional, we don't really know how it's going to be used, some of these videos are not appropriate for the learning environment because they're clearly pushing a political agenda. Scary stuff for sure. And as I said, I highly recommend you all look into this and speak to whoever you need to in your area to get this thing figured out and hopefully stopped. Meanwhile, some news that we missed happened last Wednesday. The state Supreme Court ruled last Wednesday that South Carolina's law that allows parents to spend taxpayer money on private schools violates the Constitution. The 3-2 ruling prohibits paying tuition or fees with, quote, education scholarship trust funds, end quote. But it does allow parents to use that money for indirect private expenses like tutoring, textbooks, and other educational material. So that educational scholarship trust fund is basically a voucher program. You probably are more familiar with that term, where taxpayer money can be used for folks to go to like a private school. And depending on the state, there's different requirements. In this state, nearly 3,000 students have already been awarded $1,500 each under the program. The court won't require it to be paid back, even if it's spent on private school tuition or fees, because this was already promised to them before the ruling. So I guess that's good. That's deemed okay. Although the case itself was argued before the high court in March, well before that money was distributed, but they're going to allow that to move forward. But outside of that, the court has ruled that will no longer be appropriate. Taxpayer money can't be used to help you send your kid to private school. So update on that one. Again, visit the link in the show notes if you want some more details, but that's the gist of that. Do you remember that woman who last year caused all sorts of problems in Berkeley County by challenging 93 books in a single day? Well, she's now running for school board. Bet you didn't see that coming. Oh, wait, you probably did. Yes, last year, you may remember Angelina Davenport launched a huge challenge that targeted 93 books in the district's school libraries, and she did so all in a single day. This triggered a costly review process. I think in the end, it ended up costing the district something along the lines of like $6,000 to go through that review process. And this is all part of the debate of what's appropriate and what's not in libraries, which I've already been talking about here in this podcast. Now, her list wasn't like limited to just some like obscure titles. I'm sure some of you have seen that list, and there's some books like I've never heard of this. And to be honest, there are some books when I did learn about them, like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this one doesn't belong in a library that's accessible by a certain age of student. I'm not saying necessarily to ban these books, but there are different things that could be done. Well, this isn't that. This includes books that have been taught for generations. We're talking about books like Slaughterhouse-Five, Toni Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning Beloved, Richard White's classic Native Son, and some modern bestsellers were also included on that list, including Water for Elephants, and some fantasy novels written by Sarah J. Maas. I hope I pronounced her last name right. They were all included in this, huge list. When asked like what student is affected by these, like there was like a review process. She had to fill out a form. She said every student in Berkeley County. And so, yes, that made a lot of headlines. And her objections, which ended up spanning 279 separate pages, accused South Carolina's fourth largest school district of distributing obscene materials to minors. The school district spokesperson confirmed that none of the 93 books that Davenport challenged were ultimately removed. But that's not because they made the right decision or wrong decision. The whole review process was suspended in December, so it wasn't even completed. So we don't really know what would have happened there. And basically, one of the reasons that this whole process was suspended was because of how costly it was. And she, by making this request, really shone a bright light on it. Now, there's an open school board seat, and she's going to run for it. And by the way, her campaign logo even features a stack of 6 books, as if she's some like supporter of books and learning. Of course, it's concerning. We're seeing this with school boards, not just concerning on a personal level based on your own political beliefs, but because these are supposed to be nonpartisan races, these school boards. And we're seeing increasingly they're becoming partisan, even though candidates may not say outright if, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm an independent, I'm a libertarian. They don't have to officially declare a party in these nonpartisan races. So they don't have to. But some do. And also some just with their talking points, you can already tell what their belief system likely is. And no surprise, I'm sure that I'm going to relay this news, and you're going to be like, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds right. That is that Davenport is a well-known Moms for Liberty activist. She's also a former vice chair of the Berkeley County chapter, specifically for Moms for Liberty. So we know exactly what we're getting with this candidate. She is running against Dan Fromel. I hope I pronounced that right. Apologies if I didn't. He is a former principal who turned federal education consultant, aka someone who sounds like their background may actually be, suitable for someone running for school board, not some Moms for Liberty crank who bought into all the propaganda about books and tried to ban nearly 100 books from a school library. So for those of you in Berkeley County, just a heads up, that's going on, and will certainly, I'm sure, turn into a contentious race. It's going to be, as far as school boards go, very high profile in this area, something to keep an eye on. And if you're in that area or have friends or family, spread the word as you see fit, on whether you think another Moms for Liberty, not just backed candidate, but an activist and former vice chair of that organization should be on the school board. And the last school update, cell phone use for students will soon be banned in all South Carolina schools. The South Carolina Department of Education launched what they called Free to Focus South Carolina after the State Board of Education's final approval for a statewide model cell phone policy was passed last week. Officials say the initiative will serve as a one-stop shop for educators, parents, and students across the Palmetto State to create a school environment without constant digital distractions. According to the State Department of Education, South Carolina educators completed a survey and reported that cell phones contributed to behavioral issues and social problems among students. In fact, many teachers added that cell phones are a major source of distraction during instructional time, and that leads to lost instruction minutes and reduced academic performance. Officials report that local districts and their boards will finalize the rollout of the cell phone policy this fall, so they'll have some more details about how exactly this will work, what exceptions there will be, because I'm sure there has to be some. Maybe students who have a particular medical issue will be allowed to carry their cell phones. We'll see. There's a lot to still be worked out in that sense. So they'll work all that out in the fall, and the plan is for the state to implement it beginning in January of 2025, so right in the new year. Now, for those of you wondering, do schools have to participate? Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, they do, because if they don't, um, they risk losing state funding for aid in its classrooms. So, although technically any school district can be like, nah, we're good, we're going to do our own thing, they could risk losing state funding, which is obviously a big deal. So it's kind of a, yeah, they have to do it. So interesting. I've kind of, gone back and forth with this. When I was in high school, I don't think anybody was carrying cell phones. Maybe a couple teachers had them, but and if any students had them, I don't remember them like using them in the class. It just wasn't a thing. Just wasn't something that, it's not like it is today, obviously. So I don't know, but I could certainly understand how it could very easily be a distraction or aid in different, nefarious activities, whether it be cheating on tests or bullying or whatever else. Um, but I can certainly understand how cell phones could be a distraction and a problem. So depending on what the rollout is, this could be a very good thing or could be a little iffy. But again, I certainly can understand where teachers are coming from. I can also understand where some parents are coming from, where they're worried that for whatever reason they've got something that they need to be able to get a hold of their child, or their child needs to get a hold of them, and that could concern them. Of course, another concern is school shootings, which unfortunately is a reality of our culture here in America. And what does that mean if they can't have their cell phones? Is it going to be harder for them to get help, call 911? I mean, obviously, there are other methods in place to alert authorities. And I would imagine teachers are going to be allowed to have their cell phones like in their classroom or whatever. In some classrooms, I'm sure still have phones in the room, like old, landline type phones, or at least phones that go directly to the office. So, I know there's still some things in place, but that is a worry. What if there's an emergency like that going on, and they can't contact people on the outside for whatever they need, just to alert them of the incident, to let them know where they are hiding, anything else. So certainly an interesting topic. Again, studies have shown like how bad the internet and cell phones, particularly cell phones that have internet access, of course, which means social media apps and all that, like how detrimental that can be I mean, to people in general, but specifically to children. So it's certainly, something that, unlike a lot of the stuff the State Department of Education does, I'm not immediately like, nope, this is a terrible idea. But it really is going to come down to implementation and what exactly the rules are. So we'll keep an eye on that for you as well. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Sorry to go a little long today, but lots to catch up on after two interviews episodes last week, and had a couple days off prior to that. So a lot to catch up on. Lots going on in the education world. Look into it. I know a lot of this doesn't. You may be hearing about this whole PragerU thing for the first time. Go look into it. See what you think. You may find some other details that I didn't. That may further cement what you believe in it, or it may change your mind. So go check out what else is out there, and hopefully I provided a good starting place for you to go and find those things. Obviously, you can visit the link in the show notes for more. While you're there, go ahead and like and subscribe to this podcast. It would be amazing. It helps out. And leave a review, rating, whatever you can do on the platform you're listening on. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and also Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. Believe it or not, the election is like 50-ish days away, and time is running out to register to vote. Tuesday was National Voter Registration Day, but we still have some time. If you want to vote here in South Carolina, you have until I believe it's October 7th to register. Go to chsvotes.org or scvotes.org. There's all sorts of other websites out there as well where you can check your registration status, make sure everything's up to date, get registered if you are not. It's a very important election, and I hope in listening to this podcast, it's not just the presidential election. Yes, of course, that's important. So are any other, races on the federal level. But we're learning each and every year more and more how important city council and school boards are and how much they really can affect your day to day. So hopefully hearing like the types of things that are going on shows you just how quickly and easily on these lower levels of government things can get implemented under the radar as well. So in any event, make sure you're registered to vote. It's coming up quickly. And I know some of you probably hate politics, and I get it. Trust me, I get it. But it is important. With that said, I will be back with you on Friday. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. Until then, good night and good luck.